Hello and welcome. My name is Olivia Ryan Hill, and I produce the conference programs for the Vehicle Electrification Expo and Battery Cells and Systems shows. These pivotal events are focused on delivering automotive electrification in the UK and internationally, and are brought to you by the team at Event Partners. I'm delighted to introduce one of our key conference speakers, David Hudson, who's joining me in conversation about some of the major trends in battery and EV design. David is Head of Vehicle and Powertrain Engineering at Tata Motors and has previously worked at Jaguar, wearing multiple technical hats in the industry both in the UK and in India. Perhaps you can give us an idea of your experience, David, in a nutshell.
I've been involved in the automotive industry for 4 decades, many changes, and of course the trend to electrification has been one of the key ones. I've really been involved in that for the past 7 or 8 years, whilst at Tata Motors, because that's when the real electrification story has been taking off, and have been involved in a number of the sort of proof of concept vehicles that we've done, leading to a recent launch of our first production EV in India. So it's an exciting time to be around automotive at the moment.
There have obviously been some fairly vocal concerns around the ethical, environmental and cost-based footprints and challenges in increasing EV and battery size exponentially. But today what we want to see, what we want to talk about really, are what are the challenges, what are the alternatives, and are these alternatives actually viable as a replacement or complementary strategy to sit alongside both the current and planned lithium-ion battery and EV designs. Perhaps if we look at a specific example, the proposed Tesla Roadster is set to have 600 plus mile range, but we've all heard the stats. On average, people drive 29.2 miles a day, 2 trips of just 46 minutes. So, you know, is it still such a great thing that that we're pushing for these ever greater ranges on electric vehicles?
Yes, it is, of course. Technically, the engineers being what they are, they get given a target and then try to exceed it. And very long range has for some time been the goal of EV engineering. We've tried to replicate what you can get with a liquid hydrocarbon fueled vehicle, and of course, with the advent of diesels across the range in that field over the last sort of decade or two, has meant that we've seen extremely long ranges. There are a number of cars out there that have probably got a range of 1,000 kilometres on a tank of fuel if you're careful. And we've assumed that all customers want exactly that to be replicated in their EVs, because if you ask a customer what do they want an EV to do, they say the same as an ICE. So we've taken a target which is not wrong, but is not necessarily the most appropriate target. To back that up, we've now instigated in the battery industry, the battery supply chain has got itself very excited about producing batteries that will allow every vehicle, certainly above a certain price point, to have such long range. And that means that we are very used to the idea of talking about gigafactories, these factories of battery factories that are capable of making more than a gigawatt hour a year of battery. And the forecasts that many of the leading analysts have done say that the world is going to need hundreds of these gigafactories in order to supply the the millions of vehicles we've got to build. And at a simple maths level, that of course is true. But the one factor that's in there that's a variable in this equation is what is the average size of battery in the average car. Recently, Volkswagen have announced some details about the extension of their ID range. The ID3 is with us right now. They have talked about that platform starting with 50 kilowatt hour batteries and going up from there. We, based on the statistics you've just talked about, the very short driving ranges, that is enough range to mean that you wouldn't charge your EV more than once a week, which might be what the behaviour pattern is with your liquid fuel car, but actually charging of an EV is a different experience than filling up a car with fuel. You don't have to go anywhere to do it. It's charged where you are, whether you're at work, whether you're at the shops, whether you're at home. You simply have to plug the car in. and it takes half a minute instead of having to sit in a smelly, deserted petrol station for 5 or 10 minutes where you've had to go out of your way to get there. So it's an entirely different experience, and it's not really fair to say people don't want to have multiple charge events, refueling events. So therefore, the logic is if filling your electric car is convenient, and we've now, particularly as a result of lockdown, we've realised that you don't actually need a car for a lot of the things you said that they were absolutely vital trips. They're not vital trips. We've learned to live with much less mobility. The liquid fuel industry is hurting because of the much reduced consumption of fuel over the last 3 months. So there's an argument to be made that sensible EVs, as I like to call them, things which have got range that is much more suitable to their mission, actually are very, very good things to do, because it stretches the supply of lithium-ion batteries, even within the current manufacturing constraints, and you get more vehicles equipped with a battery, not necessarily the biggest battery. And by having more vehicles out there, you touch the lives of more people, you substitute more IC vehicles, and therefore things like air quality improve as well as energy consumption. So there's it's a bit of a rambling answer, but
No.
the fact is, if you assume that the average EV is, let's say, 30 kilowatt hours rather than 50 or 60 kilowatt hours, which is the kind of trend we've been going for now, the logic says you've got twice as many cars for the same battery factory capacity. And that is a massive difference. That is steps of millions of cars around the world.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And obviously you mentioned a little bit there about range anxiety. And I know that you have some thoughts on how charging infrastructure, or the use of charging infrastructure and charging points, might actually provide some of the solutions to this.
Well, of course, charging infrastructure is one of those very controversial topics, because it's always brought up as the reason why EVs aren't more widely used, is that people say, oh, well, I can't charge them. But actually, when you examine the statistics for the usage of public EV charge points, they're actually, chronically underutilized. That the utilization rates are in single-digit percentages for the vast majority of places. And if you consider that somebody has been asked to fund and make a business out of running a charge point, the return on capital is not very good. You have to, and also, of course, a lot of criticism about charge points not being usable, being out of service. Whoever buys them has got to first of all get a return on their investment and pay maintenance costs and so on. So we can't quite see how, as an industry, we can force the private sector to fund more charge points when the return on their current investment is very low. So therefore, you're left with either sort of public sector charging, and that's been done successfully in a number of countries that have been early adopters. China's had very strong public infrastructure. Norway, the poster child for the European focus of EVs, have both had very major state interventions, but still their utilization rates of charge points are very low. What we've got to do is make people use those charge points as a matter of routine, and not use them as they do today, which is a last resort emergency. Because if you then get, it'd be like saying, I've got a 500 gallon petrol tank at home, and I'd much rather go home and fill up from my own petrol tank than go to a station on the corner, or go to the supermarket. That would drive those guys out of business really quickly. And we're facing the same problem. It's because it's easy to charge EVs in different places. The one place that we focused on, the public charging network, isn't really the most important of those. Yes, it's important to have it. And yes, every country, every emerging country, and in India, we're seeing this particularly. At the end of last year, there were only about 150 public charge points across the whole of India, which is a country with nearly 1.5 billion people, and with a car market of 2.5 million cars a year, not EVs, of course. So very, very sparse. The Indian government has said it wants to increase the frequency of charge station occurrence much higher. They're talking about every 25 kilometres on highways. They're talking about within every 3 kilometres within cities. So, you know, those are all massive goals, which they can be met, but over time. And what we've got to do is educate the users of EVs to feel that that topping up an EV at a public charge point is perfectly normal behaviour, and that they move on quickly from those charge points. They don't block them up. So very significant stories to be told around charging, but it's not the only thing. We've got to put the cars out there and make them available.